So we did take care about the database. As a next step, we can now deploy our code. And for this, we should first of all go through the Heroku language-specific setup instructions. In our case, we should go through the specific Node.js deployment instructions, though no worries, that will be rather simple. Now here we learn that we should have the dependencies that we need in package.json, and we do have that because we always used npm install for adding them, so they were automatically added. This is now also where the difference between dependencies and dev dependencies becomes important, because Heroku will, once we pushed our code to Heroku, automatically install all the dependencies but not the dev dependencies. Because the idea behind the dev dependencies is that, as their name suggests, we only need them during development. That's why it's so important to have all the key dependencies in this dependencies node in package.json, because Heroku will use that to install all the dependencies after we pushed our code. So that's something we have to take care about, and that is something we did take care about. As a next step, we can specify the specific node version we want to use. Now, of course, we have a certain version installed locally. We can see it if we type node -- version, but just because we have it locally does not mean that Heroku will use the exact same version. It might be using an older version, and if we are then using a Node.js feature that only exists in the latest version, then that older version Heroku might be using might not be enough. Now here that's not the case. Still, you might want to add an extra node here to your package.json file, anywhere in there, and that would be the engines node, the engines key value pair, just as mentioned here in the Heroku documentation, where you set the node version you want to use. So in the engines object here, we can set node, and in my case, I'll set it to 16.x to use that version. Or to be precise, to force Heroku to use that version for executing our code. Now, once that is done, you can specify a start script if you didn't add a proc file. So if no proc file exists, then you should update your start script to use node instead of nodemon. But since I do have a proc file, that will be prioritized by Heroku, and this command will be executed instead. So we should be fine regarding that, and we don't need to update our start script. Now we can then also test this locally with the Heroku local web command to preview this website locally as Heroku would execute it on the server, but I'll skip this here. And instead I'll make sure that we have the gitignore file set up properly, and for this we can copy the settings from here and override our gitignore file with the configuration from there, though the configuration we had before would have also worked. And now we can deploy our application to Heroku by first of all adding a new commit, logging in, which we already did, creating, which we already did, and therefore pushing is the step we now need to do. So first of all, I'll create another commit with all the changes we applied. Git commit finalized deployment. And after doing this, we can run this command here, git push Heroku main, to push our code from our local machine to Heroku's servers. Though actually in my case, my main branch is still called master, so I'll have to change this. You in the end can run git branch to see what your branch name is. And if this is main, this command will work. If it's master, as it is here for me, you should change this to master. And this will now push our code to Heroku's servers. And then there, you automatically will get this build output where Heroku will now install all dependencies and then start our server. Though, starting that server will actually fail here, as you will see soon, because connecting to the database will fail. Now, we get the URL automatically here in the output where we should be able to visit our deployed website. But if you enter this, you won't see anything there because, as I just mentioned, deployment will fail. Because what we need to do, since we use environment variables, is we should log into Heroku and go to dashboard.heroku.com or just to heroku.com. And I'll accept this here. And now here, I got two applications actually, because I did this twice on different machines. This one is the one I just pushed. So you probably only have one application here. And here on this screen, you find more information about your website, your application, and you can configure it. And most importantly, here we can also add environment variables. Here under config vars. Here we now need to add this environment variable, which we expect in database.js, the MongoDB URL variable. Not the process env part, that's Node.js specific, just the name after .env. And that is now what we add here as a key. And as a value, we now take this URL here from MongoDB Atlas. And we paste this in here as a value, though you have to make sure you use the correct username here and you replace the password with the concrete password you set up for this MongoDB database user. And then click Add. That's important. We could have done that locally with that Heroku tool as well, but I wanted to also show you this interface and where you could set environment variables there. Now, there are more things you can configure here. For example, you could add a SSL certificate for HTTPS serving, which is recommended if this would be a serious website. You got documentation and a easy to use process here on Heroku to add this certificate, to add extra security to your website. And you can also add a custom domain here, just as you could do it on Netlify. As I mentioned earlier, most hosting providers offer features like this. Now here, that's all fine though. I'll instead go here to More and actually click Restart All Dynos. A dyno is just a remote machine, a server in Heroku's world. And with that, I restart my website now that I got the updated environment variable. Now, after doing that, maybe after waiting a couple of seconds, you should be able to click Open App, and now you should see your website, and you can also click this button here, and when you click that button, you see the counter increases, and if you reload, of course, it's still there. Because this is now dynamic with our server-side code. Now, however, as you can tell by the URL, not running on our local machine, but instead on a remote machine provided by Heroku. And now, as mentioned, you could dive deeper into Heroku, into its documentation, add a custom domain, and so on, and then you would have real website hosting for a real website.